Okay, well, we are going to kind of fly because the teen years are intense, and so we're gonna cover them. Discipline for ages 13 to 18, so basically middle school, because that's where Anna is, and up to high school. So let's dig in. We're just going to review real quick. Last week was the elementary ages, 6 to 7 through 12, and our big idea was they need opportunities to try things on their own and to learn from their mistakes in order to grow in responsibility, self-control, and good character. What we long for our kids to have, because we know that will help their life go well. Do you remember what ITCC is? The levels of discipline: instruction, training, correction, and closure. And we talked about what form of correction works well with the elementary ages. Do you remember? That's okay. That's okay. Natural and logical consequences. Basically, just letting them make some mistakes. And the two big ways that we can keep them from really learning from those natural consequences is, one, if we get really mad and angry, they're focused on that instead of what they need to learn. Or two, if we hover like a helicopter parent and don't let them, if we rescue them from those consequences. So we're going to play a bit of word association here. What comes to your mind when I say sunshine? Happy? That was one of my words. I'm a sunshine girl. It's like I love happy. What about you, Josh? Sunshine.
Outside, trees.
Yes, yes. Okay. How about when I say teenager?
Gloomy.
Or adolescent? Yes, okay. So big idea number 12 is parents of teens need to hope for the best, prepare for the worst, be proactive and effective in training our children to face the snares of adolescence, and engage your child in relationship while pointing them to Christ. And we'll dig into each of those in more detail. A lot of the material that I got there are good books, are a reference from these. And those are on your handout, so if you ever want to get into them, you'll know. And I'm sure there'll be more in the coming years. But what we're going to talk about is adolescence. And really, sometimes we think of adolescence as just like the pre or early teen years, but it's really that whole time period. Let's define what we mean. It is the God-ordained road to becoming an independent adult that passes through years of unprecedented change and questioning. Or a time that curiosity is piqued. Thank you. And the natural questioning of a tween is replaced, don't we all want to hear this, by the teen exploration mindset of let's do it. That kind of depends on the personality of your teen too. Some are more prone to that than others. And this is a natural part of adolescence. Eugene Peterson, he's the man who did the Message translation of the Bible, he said, "There are no well-adjusted adolescents. Adolescence is, by definition, maladjustment. And getting adjusted is a strenuous and often noisy process." But in spite of all that, as parents, we really do need to hope for the best. We don't want to buy in to society's dread of and cynicism about the teen years, expecting the worst, expecting rebellion and chaos. And, there are cultures in the world where it's not expected that a teen become rebellious. And I think we, and especially as Christian parents, need to not expect that from our kids. We need to hope for the best. Walter Mueller, in this book, The Space Between, says, instead of seeing adolescence as something to survive, we need to see it as a God, is that on here? Given opportunity to depend on God for guidance and wisdom that will help us point our kids to the cross and spiritual maturity and take us there as well. So it is a chance for us to grow in guidance and wisdom, and also to point our kids to Jesus over and over again, because they will have those hard issues that come up, and where we can point them back to the cross. And these are truths from God's word. It's not true that children are anything else but a gift from the Lord. They are a real blessing. And also, this is a good one for parents of teens. God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power and love and self-discipline. But it is good, as you do when you face any kind of tumultuous possible experience, or a storm or weather coming in, you want to prepare for the worst. So now especially that you're on the very verge of the teen years, you want to dedicate time and energy to growing in your own relationship with the Lord. That can be so hard to do when you have little kids. I remember there are times where I'm thinking, I can't even find time to cut my toenails. How am I supposed to read my Bible? But the more that you can find ways, whether it be scriptures, little flips by your kitchen sink and your bathroom sink, and time when you can to learn from Jesus, that is going to give you a stable base to prepare for the worst. And then you need to realize the needs of kids haven't changed from when you were a teen, but their world certainly has. And you need to be aware and alert about the reality of the culture your teen is immersed in. You need to keep your eyes open and ask lots of questions. I can't even begin to tell you because, Maddie is 6. Mm-hmm. She's not going to be a teen for 7 more years. What our culture may be like, you'll just want to pray and ask the Lord for lots of wisdom.
Yes.
Because I know in that our kids were at Mount Spokane High School for a total of 12 years. And the culture at Mount Spokane High School, from the time our son entered, and then the 12 years later when our daughter left, lots of change had occurred. So you just need to be aware and keeping, and in conversation with your kids. What's the culture like? Mm-hmm. Talk often with your teen about both God's truth and the lies that they will encounter, especially as you're going into it. And even with kids, to begin to talk about what's true and not true. I would often pray for them out loud that they would, when they headed off to school, that they would not just grow in knowledge, but in wisdom, and be able to recognize if there were any lies that they encountered. And I also often, we want to prepare our kids for the worst too. I tell my kids often, being a teenager is hard. I don't know if you look back on it. There were, there is all this change and things that's going on, and you're trying to figure out how you fit in and who you are. And but even I think sometimes when we verbally tell our kids, it's gonna have tough times. It's not an easy time. But on the other end, it'll get better. Or even I tell them, it was some of the hardest times of life. And the pressures in high school and junior high to fit into a mold and everything, and it'll never be the same after that. Believe it or not, that can be encouraging to them, because when they go through it, they're thinking, okay, mom or dad said this is going to be tough, but it's not the end. I don't have to give in to despair. Paul Tripp, who is the writer of one of these books as well, reminds us the teenage years are often cataclysmic years of conflict, struggle, and grief. That doesn't have to necessarily be conflict with parents, but even conflict and struggle over, developing crushes or with friends. There's just a lot going on in the teenage years. They are years of new temptations, of trial and testing. Yet these very struggles, conflicts, trials, and tests are what produce such wonderful parental opportunities. It's when those things come up that you can speak hope and truth and Jesus into the lives of your kids. You know, you can see situations with friends, and we can talk about being kind or being mean. You can talk into, as you're comforting them, into your kids when they go through these struggles. And you know what? We want to talk a lot about what God says. This is from Deuteronomy 11, and I've skipped around a little bit, but God is saying, carefully obey the commands I'm giving you today. Love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and soul. Be careful. Don't let your heart be deceived so that you turn away from the Lord. So commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these words of mine. Teach them to your children. Talk about them when? When you're at home, when you're on the road, when you're going to bed, when you're getting up. Your kids are going to think, Mom and Dad never stop talking about Jesus. But you know what? That's okay. So that your children may flourish. Be careful to obey. Show love to the Lord your God by walking in his ways and holding tightly to him. If you're doing that in your relationship and you're passing that on to your kids, you're giving them a great hope. These are Tom's words, and I don't know, he said them innumerable times to our kids, that all of God's commands are given to
protect
and
provide.
protect and provide. And that God's heart is good, and his discipline is part of his love. He longs to bring good to our lives as we follow him. I would say, you know, that promise from Jeremiah that, you know, I know the plans I have for you, plans for welfare, to give you a future and a hope. But I'd say to my kids all the time, the thing is, it's like follow the leader, though. You have to follow him to get to the good plans. But just to speak a lot into the lives. Because what is the greatest problem? I left this blank, so you have to think. What is the greatest problem facing teenagers today? Well, believe it or not, it's the same great problem that faces us. It's sin. And in essence, that's exchanging the truth of God for a lie. That's from Romans 1:25. But that's the original sin with Adam and Eve. The truth of what God told them, instead they exchanged it for the lie that Satan gave them. And we are all broken and in desperate need of a Savior and of the Holy Spirit to grow and change us. But, and your kids, our teens are all broken and in desperate need of a Savior. But they also have this God-shaped emptiness within us it's made. It's part of who we are, and you can know that God is going to be using that to draw them to himself. So it's really he that does, and the Holy Spirit that does the work, but we do a good job as parents of pointing. This part we're going to plow through because the truth is, what is so different? Oh, we are all broken. What's so different about today's culture? Well, we're going to go through these in a little more detail, but overexposure to everything, lack of real connection, over-responsible parents and irresponsible kids, respect in all the wrong places, loss of gender difference, and living with constant uncertainty. So those are things that are maybe even different from when you guys were in high school, or getting increasingly pointing toward that way anyway. Overexposure to everything. You know, it's like our kids enter the adolescent years, your sweet Anna at the age of 13, you know, where they're just headed in, and they've been used to Little League, where they're standing and Dad is there, and he's getting ready to just give them, you know, the dad's trying really hard to get it right over the plate and right in the easy strike zone so that this young man can knock it out of the park. But what happens with our kids is instead they're faced with like a major league fastball and more than one coming at them all at once. And it's like they get into this, and especially today with all the internet gives us many blessings and many resources, but also just, or social media, a lot of overexposure. But it doesn't have to be a bad thing. I don't know, you guys, public school there's more and more different influences in it. But for us, we had homeschooled all of our kids through the 8th grade, and we made the choice to send them to high school, partially because we wanted them we felt like they had survived the junior high age, which our pediatrician said she thought everybody should be taken out of school in junior high and just given a break and put back in later. But so they're a little more confident in who they are. But we wanted them to have challenges to their worldview, to have temptations where they were still coming home at night, sitting with us around the dinner table, and we could say, what'd you learn today? What's going on? Or someone could start using really foul language, and we could say, there's a lot of dog poop that needs to be picked up in the backyard, and since you're using that kind of language, you just go, it can be your job to go do it. Didn't you do that one?
I think something.
Anyway, but it's when the hard things happen, you want to see them as opportunities to build into your kids' lives. Adolescents today would have to be completely isolated to avoid the culture's power to affect and sway their moral judgment. It's true, it's not an easy time, so you do want to be prepared. There is so much overexposure. Social networking, where imagery and bragging rights are the measures of one's value and influence. I used to have all kinds of statistics in here, but you know that, how bad it can be, and I don't want to focus on all of that, but in advertising, our kids are marinating in images of perfect people, and here it's very important too for you to be careful to set a good example in your own use of social media, and to be not over obsessed with your own appearance either. We want to stress inner character and stress that in our kids, and especially our young ladies, because that can be such a hard time for them. And profanity, teachers never, and now your coaches and, profanity that was once taboo is now normal and widely accepted. And when your kids marinate in that all day at school, I didn't realize, and, like our son who came home and started, it's common language now. It's not the way it used to be. And so they can't understand, why is it such a big deal? I hear it all day, all along when I'm at school. Sex. The invitation to participate has been replaced with an expectation to be involved. And so a teen who is naturally hungry for excitement and experimentation and interaction with others, they're bombarded with over-sexualization in our culture. And again, we just need, and we'll talk about this later, to talk a lot to our kids about what the truth is about their sexuality, and the truth about drugs and alcohol, and hard truths like, the girl who was at a college, you hear the story of the girl who was at a college frat party and she was date raped. And you say to your sweet daughters, well, was that wise for her to be drunk at a college? Sometimes it's a way to caution them. Not that justifies any kind of abuse of women. I'm not trying to say that. But we need to encourage our kids too. If you want to be protected from some things, you need to make sure you don't put yourself in vulnerable situations. Drugs and alcohol, I mean, marijuana now is legal. There's just so much more. And we know with COVID, both depression and suicide rates have gone way up. So it is a tough world out there that you're sending your beautiful, sweet girls into, and that Maddie will and Sam will be entering someday. There's also a lack of real connection. Because we're created in God's image, and God really is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's a relationship, and we have this intrinsic need to belong and to be in relationship. And it's a natural desire to want to connect with other people. And while teens can communicate often and a lot with texting, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, that's really not making real human deep connections, true connections with one another. And also, it seems like this generation goes to great lengths to get attention. It's become, like in our you just kind of wanted to fit in and not stand out and be the sore thumb. And now it's kind of like you want to stand out. It's the look at me generation. It's the emphasis has gone from wanting to fit in to wanting to stand out. And so there's three damaging attitudes that go with that. Oversharing of opinions amongst teens, and appearance is priority, and performance, rather than finding value and self-worth from relationships with people, they find it from performance, or who can take the best picture. Another thing our kids face is over-responsible parents, irresponsible kids. We just don't want to be over-responsible. Remember, we want to be letting go, and because otherwise we're just robbing our kids of what they truly can become and be, and of growing in responsibility and self-control. This was a very interesting true story that is written by Mark Gregston. When I first met 23-year-old Rachel, I was impressed with the way she presented herself and somewhat awestruck at her resume, which detailed many outstanding qualities, experience she had to offer to our children's ministry, and some amazing goals that were in line with our mission to families. So I hired her. I knew within a couple of months that I had made a terrible mistake. During that period of time, I witnessed childish behavior and a gross absence of the verbal skills her resume reported she possessed. She possessed an immaturity that was reflected in her inability to get work completed on time, follow through on projects, and complete tasks that were given to her. She was awkward in social settings, childish in her peer relations, and had no respect for authority. She always had an excuse for unfinished tasks and justification for everything missed. Despite being in her early 20s, Rachel behaved like an immature high school girl who appeared ready for the job, but was nothing like she described herself in the job interview. At lunch one day, Rachel shared that her dad had written all her college papers and had crafted for her what he thought would be a good resume to send to potential employers. Those at the table now knew the reason behind the frustrations we felt as we listened to her stories of how Rachel's dad had done everything for her. She thought it was funny. I thought it was sad. I found myself getting angry, not at her, but at her dad, who in his well-intentioned assumption of his daughter's responsibilities created a mess for our staff and a greater mess for her. This girl wasn't prepared for the world in which she was to function. Instead, she was living in a fantasy world because an over-responsible parent had created an irresponsible young lady who quickly lost her job. So remember, we want to help our kids when they're old enough to do certain self-care tasks or to help around the house, to do the dishes, to do chores. We want to help them grow in responsibility so that they will be successful in their lives. Do you remember this chart we talked about where the child starts with very little control and it grows up, and our control starts big and comes down? Because the first C was commander in those early years. Training for obedience is what happens during that time. And we've dealt with that a lot. And then after that, from as they're approaching the age of 10, and then from about age 11 to maybe 15, 16, training for responsibility, self-control, and character as a coach. So their parent is there on the sidelines, but they're letting them go out and on the field to play and make their own mistakes, learn from the natural, logical consequences, and natural consequences and logical ones if we need to make them up. But by the time a child is 15 or 16, come more the parent a role of a counselor, where you listen to the thoughts and feelings, you ask really good questions, and you encourage them that you know they can be capable of making wise decisions. You talk to them in private. Those ages are vulnerable. You don't want to be doing this in front of even other siblings, but unless that they approach you in that kind of environment. But you want teenagers need to know a loving parent cares about what they're doing and is aware of the choices they're making, but then who releases them to have independent experiences. Then you get, as you've done your job well, and as the Lord has worked in their lives, and they've learned obedience and responsibility and self-control, and then they're going out, you get to move into a cool role of being a consultant, where you're just supportive and you're available. You're not withdrawing, you're still there if they need you, but you are releasing them, and you're telling them, I'm confident that you can go. I don't know if I already told you this, but I didn't cry when I left my kids at college. And I cry pretty easy. But I'm so grateful, but it was a place where I knew they were ready to go and they were going to be okay and they could thrive. I did cry. Our semi-adopted son, who had only really been a part of our family for about... Yeah, if it that much, really, a lot steady had lived with us for 6 months. I cried when I left him because I wasn't sure. I didn't know him well enough. I hadn't gotten to nurture and love him enough. So, but when we can release our kids, it can be a great blessing to us and to them. And then the motto for adult children is, all unsolicited advice comes across as criticism. So if they ask, we give it to them. If they don't ask, hands off. And adolescents are going to naturally begin to push away from us as they seek to become independent. Don't resent that. That's normal. That's healthy. I know especially it seemed like with each of our sons, about the age of 15, it was like, oh, please, can we get this year over with? Especially with me as the mom, because it's like they're becoming men, and mom, and we would tell our kids all the time, we're going to get really, when they were teens, we're going to get really dumb for a while, and then, believe it or not, when you turn about, 22, 23, all of a sudden we'll be smart again. But sometimes if you can just joke and laugh about those things that are naturally going to happen with them, it can help them make it through. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this one, but again in our culture, a reality of today's culture is there's respect in all the wrong places. Respect is defined as an outward expression showing a deep admiration towards someone because of their abilities, qualities, or achievements. Kids, it's hard for teens to grasp the truth. They get so much information, and sometimes we as adults, it's hard to discern what's true and not true. But oftentimes, teens don't hold people in authoritative positions in high regard anymore. Not the way it used to be, where there was respect for those in authority. Now, oftentimes, there's this idea of an attitude, a world dominated by judgment, where there's a lot of focus to discredit those positions of authority. But respect is so important for our kids to have if they're going to thrive in the world. And it begins at home. Parents need to both require and give respect. Even our teenagers are not allowed to speak to us disrespectfully. I mean, we can't come down in an authoritarian manner, but we can tell them, again, there's one commandment with a promise in the Bible that you'd have a long, good life, and that's that you honor your father and mother. So it's not okay. You can question me. What would you say sometimes you can make if they disagree?
You can make one appeal, and I'll give a good hearing, and I will active listen, make sure I understand all the issues, but then that's it. We can be done when that's over.
Right. And so you have to be honest with that, and sometimes then you say, okay, I wasn't really thinking about that. I can make some compromise there, because they're starting to be capable. You want them to know that, of thinking through things well. But then, so that they know. So you do want to show respect for your kids, and we're going to do a whole class of that the last class. But you want to know that for your kids, the wave of culture's disrespect is coming. It's going to come, and they're going to try. It's going to be hard not to be influenced by that. So you want to talk to them, discuss what the media is saying about celebrities and public authority figures. Is it really? Do we want to take this man's advice on everything as true and good because he's good at sports, or she's a beautiful actress? Does that mean she can? Do you know what I'm saying? But to just help them really think through why are we giving respect, or why are we not giving respect to certain people? And the other thing is, it is true that we have huge failures often in politics or government, but we also need to provide for our kids many examples of people that are worthy of respect. What did I do? Where am I going? Now, I don't know. I love movies. But they can be a great way to sit down and watch things with your kids. These are just some examples. The Lord of the Rings, that's not true, people, but you can get in a lot of discussions about good and evil and influences of culture. You would know, but even, have any of you seen the Jesus Revolution? Okay. Do we have pastors or churches that have terrible failings? Yes. But this is actually a very thoughtful movie that just shows, even someone who, of course, some pastors we have known have just really terribly not been worthy of respect. But even, they're just humans, though. This one shows a man who starts out with good intentions, but his pride kind of gets in the way, and but then he comes back. But these things can be starting points. Movies you watch, books, celebrities you see, people that they want to emulate, to talk about what's good and true and right with our kids. Woo! Now this is a big one. Loss of gender differences. Media's portrayal of men and women causes confusion. Okay, here's some deep truths. And these I got, I'll show the books. Let's see, not there yet. These books. Wild at Heart by John Eldridge and Captivating. And those are on your handout too. But Girls are asking, am I lovely? And that's the core issue they want answered in their hearts. And the true beauty, we want them to help them know, just like when I say beautiful mothers, it's beautiful in kindness and goodness. True beauty is a condition of the heart that is shown through love and fervor for life and people. And our boys and teenage sons are asking, do I have what it takes? And we want to help them understand that true manliness, strength, courage, conviction, being comfortable in your own skin, and a stout-hearted willingness to oppose error and fight for truth. We want, as parents, one of the parents' roles, this is a quote from one of the book, in the life of a child is to give clarity, discussion, and explanation to gender issues. We want to address and talk about often that as our kids get older, the issues that are confusing. I found this so funny. We'll talk a little bit about sexuality later, but I was looking through my shelves. Why boys and girls are different. I thought, and this actually is back in 1982, was from the Lutheran Church. But I am he, God made me. I am she, God made me. It used to be just normal that we would say he and she. And so sometimes we need to talk to our kids about how silly it is that we can't just call people he and she anymore. Because that is the way God made. God made she's and God made he's. It says, God made each one specially. He made you too. Didn't he do a good job? And to talk about the fact that if we're not accepting that, are we saying God didn't do a good job? There is a quote from Captivating and Wild at Heart. Men want a battle to fight, an adventure to live, and a beauty to rescue. That is what is written in their hearts, and that is what little boys play at. That is what men's movies are about. You just see it. It's undeniable. When I put up all those movies up there, did you kind of know which ones were the men's movies and which, some are both. I like action and adventure, but anyway. A woman wants to be romanced. She wants to be an essential part of a great adventure, too, and she wants a beauty to unveil. That is what little girls play at. I'm not saying this is gospel truth, but I found a lot of help in these thoughts by the Eldridges. And those are the movies women love and the stories they love. They always have those three ingredients. An authentic man is therefore a man who is living with strength and courage and offering his strength on behalf of others. It is not about selfishness. An authentic woman is vulnerable and valiant. She too can be fierce and is meant to be, not like Rambo, but the courageous women of the scripture were not church ladies. They were not these very nice women who were very dutiful and who are just here to serve. They are women who defy convention to live courageously, but also to offer vulnerability. So I would highly encourage you to read, if you can, some books about understanding boys, understanding girls, and pass on the wisdom you get from that to your boys and your girls. Another thing our kids face in our culture is living with constant uncertainty. We see that no longer do you hear just about what's going on around you. You are, especially as teens and in high school, civics classes and things, it's international messages of doom and gloom. And then there's wars, the Ukraine, movies about the end of the world, all these, help me say this word too, dystopian? Did I say that right? Movies.
Yes.
Natural disasters, COVID, economic crisis. I mean, they're just bombarded with all kinds of stuff. And then crisis is close to home. It is a big beef of me. High school is a hard age anyway. Why does all the literature that they choose for your kids to read, the overwhelming majority, have to be kind of dark and depressing and about, do you know what I'm saying? There are good stories of courageous women and men in the world too, but if we always focus on this other, and we need to talk to our kids about that kind of thing and what the messages that they're hearing from that kind of literature. And there's disease and cancer and death, and there's crisis close to home. There is uncertainty over what is true, or if there even is truth. This is getting a little dated. We hope Focus on the Family comes out with something new, but with each of our kids, there has been a worldview series called The Truth Project. And the big theme of it is, do you really believe that what you believe is really real? So is it really true? And to go through, it goes through all kinds of aspects of the culture, the family, the government, the history, and
Law.
And it's saying, what is true? The days of God said it and I believe it and that settles it for me, I would suggest that's not going to lead to very effective parenting because there are so many good reasons to believe and to know what's true. And so if you can find resources like that to help your kids know that they're going to be faced with all kinds of uncertainty over truth. Overexposure pushes normal adolescent angst, which is true of everybody who's going through all these hormonal changes, to teen anguish and normal hesitancy to higher levels of unhealthy anxiety. So you and we as parents are called to fill with certainty the voids caused in a child's life as they experience uncertainty. You can be a rock, a stabilizing, and talk through these issues. As much as you can, try to eat meals together. I know schedules get so busy when your kids get to high school, but if you can, have dinners together where you sit around and you talk about what they've learned that day, or what's going on, because you want to keep an ear and you want to talk into their life. So you want to be proactive and effective in training your kids to face the snares of adolescence. And at the ages of 6 and you're younger than teens, start the conversations now. You want to start at the beginning. Then God looked over all he had made. I didn't go forward. Come on. And he saw that it was very good. To say God made man and woman and to talk about what went wrong in the garden. You want to prepare them ahead of time for the changes that will happen. We talk about little girls, we want to prepare them ahead of time for menstruation and things like that, but there's all kinds of, zits popping out on their face, or, all these, and or maybe going along and being happy, and then all of a sudden, these self-conscious thoughts that go. There are some great resources for that, too, and those are pictured, too, like, we went through preparing for adolescence with our kids, and it was a little easier because we were homeschooling and it's kind of like a workbook, but it brings up all those different topics, or this starting to be attracted to the opposite sex and making a decision ahead of time about what you're going to do with your sexuality. And it is not too young to start at the ages of 10, or maybe even, what ages are little girls in 5th and 6th grade? 6th grade especially, I've heard, can be pretty brutal amongst
For everybody.
And she's just turned 11.
11. So maybe like 11, 12, but start ahead of time in small ways and prepare them for the changes that are going to happen in their body, and that it's going to kind of maybe surprise them a little bit. Things have been pretty stable. You want to Teach your child to trust truth over feelings. This was in Kathy's class from years ago, and actually it was especially a big help to my daughter Abby, is this statement, and you might want to write it down. You are not your feelings, you are your choices. That at the core of you, not that your feelings aren't important, but that's not who you are. And especially in those teen years when your hormones are causing you to feel all kinds of anxious and insecure, that really at the core of you, though, you are your choices. I wanted to read a quick on brain development. Lawrence Steinberg, an expert on brain development at Temple University, says, the parts of the brain responsible for things like sensation seeking are getting turned on in big ways around the time of puberty. But the parts for exercising judgment are still maturing throughout the course of adolescence. So you've got this time gap between when things impel kids toward taking risks in early adolescence, and when things that allow people to think before they act come online. And that happens later in male brains than in female brains. So it's like turning on the engine of a car without a skilled driver at the wheel. When all is said and done, the research shows that the brain may not be fully formed until the age of 24 or 25. And partially, it's good to tell your kids that. A part of your brain is going to develop that's like, let's do this. But there's another part of your brain in there that hasn't developed yet, that will someday, that would say, is that wise or foolish? And that was another thing we would often ask our kids. Is that wise? Smart or dumb, don't use that. It's like, is that wise? Or is it foolish? To help them think through those issues. And utilize all kinds of godly resources. I put this one in your handout, but also I put a bunch of links, too early for your little Maddie at 6, but not about different sexuality things that I think would be at least helpful for you to watch, so that it gives you a basis for discussions, because the sexuality piece is hitting hard by the time you turn 13, and changes are happening in your body, and you start being interested in the opposite sex. But and it's also, I had a friend just tell me that her college-age son had watched some of these videos are about, what actually brain chemistry, and like how when you have sex, there are these bonding chemicals released, and so it's not, you can't have casual sex. It's not biologically possible. And this young man told his mom, I wish you'd have told us this kind of stuff. Not that but rather than just don't do it, you're not supposed to. God says wait till you're married. It's like, what built into that are these truths. Like there's also it's not a Christian, it's not but it's called Fight the New Drug. It's about pornography, which is such a huge issue in our culture today, and can be so addictive. That's the new drug. It's addictive like a drug, and once you're addicted, it can be very hard to break out of it. But this, if we can explain that to our kids ahead of time, and to our young men, Sam's a long way from there, but to let them know ahead of time, what, someday someone's going to want you to look at a picture on a phone, and you just, and to talk ahead of time about the kind of experiences that they might come into. I talked one of my sons into asking this sweet little Christian girl to a school dance, because otherwise maybe she wouldn't have someone to go. And so, boy, was I naive at the style of dancing that changed. I don't know if you've heard of grinding or not, but we had not heard of it. And and so But the other siblings, fortunately, knew about it ahead of time. You know, as much as you can to keep your ears open and to ask questions and but blessedly, thankfully, if you can build a good relationship with your kids before they hit these years where you're communicating and you're talking, then they'll come home and say, this is what happened. And you can talk it through with them. And you can even say, and you know, even as a parent, oh man, I'm sorry, I had no idea. Because you know, it really is our job as parents, as much as we can, to prepare them ahead of time for the challenges and the things that they're going to face. And to let them know. So you want to start young to talk to your kids about sex. And I'll tell you, that's not something I necessarily was good at or did very well. But where do you want them to learn about it? From their friends or from TV or movies or song lyrics? No. So for me, books are such a big help because then you kind of have this jumping off place. So there are all kinds of Christian resources. But this one is like the story of me, ages 3 to 5. This is a series that goes, you know, up 5 to 8, and then 8 to 11, and 11 to 14. But a jumping off place to read through those things with your kids and to talk about the awkward topics. And I highly recommend this book. It's called Where Willie Went. I'm going to read it real fast. I'm going over time, okay? Just because it's really fun. It's a very
Have any of you seen this book before?
Willie.
I see where this is going.
Willie was a little sperm. He lived inside Mr. Brown, just here. He lived with 300 million other sperm, and they all lived in Mr. Brown at the same address. At school, Willie wasn't very good at math. 54 plus 135. 10? Idiot. Somebody said, but he was very good at swimming. So was Butch. Soon it would be time for the great swimming race. Willie practiced every day. So did all the other 300 million sperm. And so did Butch. And anything you can read about competition, especially to a little boy, woo! But there was only one prize, a beautiful egg. The egg was inside Mrs. Brown. If there are 300 million sperm in the race, how many will you have to beat to win the egg? The teacher asked. 10, said Willie. He wasn't very good at math, but he was very good at swimming. At last the day of the great swimming race arrived. The teacher gave them all a pair of goggles and a number, 290,010, and 2 maps. The first map showed inside Mr. Brown. Follow arrows to the treasure. You are here. The second map showed inside Mrs. Brown. This way, the egg. That very night, Mr. and Mrs. Brown joined together. The teacher cried, "Go!" And the great swimming race began. And they're off. Come on, Willie. Willie swam and swam with all his strength, but so did Butch. Willie swam as if his life depended on it, yet so did Butch. Butch was catching up. How much farther did Willie have to go? He didn't know. He wasn't very good at math. But he was the best at swimming. Hooray! The egg was lovely and soft. Willie burrowed all the way in until he disappeared. Then something strange happened. Something wonderful. Something magical. Something inside began to grow. It grew and it grew until it grew bigger than the egg. Then it grew some more until it grew bigger than Mrs. Brown's tummy. So Mrs. Brown's tummy grew bigger instead. It grew and it grew and it grew until the baby was born. It was a little girl. They called her Edna. Where had little Willie gone? Who knows? But when Edna grew into a little girl and went to school, she found she wasn't very good at math, but she was very good at swimming. So I highly recommend you all, in some form, want to be starting right now to talk to your kids about sex in very age-appropriate ways, and the books can help you know what that is. And the best illustration, or one of the best that I found for teen is, I heard this in a talk once where a man said, you know what? Just like in your home, fire is a powerful force. It can provide warmth and, coziness and all these kind of things in the fireplace. But if you take it out of the fireplace and set it on the dining room table, it's going to burn the house down. And just as the fireplace is a place for fire, so marriage is the sex place, the place for sex. Just that it is such a powerful force. There's a great book called, you guys might really like it, it's called Mama Bear Apologetics. I didn't think to bring it, but it's a very good way to talk to your adolescents about sexuality. But you do want to avoid the parenting practice of perfection. We can't expect perfection out of our kids. I'm going to fly through these things. We want to be authoritative, not authoritarian, commanding. We want to have high standards, but high love, and doing it with words that are not fighting words, but thinking words with our kids. And we don't want to be judging. I did want to read just a few quotes that kids struggling with their parents wanting them to be perfect. I brought home some grades I was proud of, and my mom started complaining that I could do better. I wasn't living up to my potential. I needed to work harder. We just, in our desire to encourage our kids to excel, we need to make sure we're not discouraging them. Not all of our kids aren't going to get God made their brains different. School's a lot harder for some than for others. Anyway, I never understood how my imperfect parents always demanded perfection of me. I wish my parents knew that the messiness of my room was just a picture of the messiness I felt in my life. They seemed more concerned about my room. I remember when my parents and I had a fight over me not wanting to go to church, and they were so concerned about what others would think if I didn't show up and if we had an argument, instead of really looking what's going on in the heart of that child. Instead of being more concerned with appearance. I couldn't measure up to my parents' ideal world, so I gave up. Just that kind of thing. Oh, this is painful. I thought my dad hated me because of the zits on my face. He always seemed embarrassed when I showed up around his friends, and he would make excuses to them in front of me as to why my face looked so bad. I remember scrubbing so hard that I would cry and wonder what was wrong with me. I know, that makes me almost want to cry. I got tired of trying to attain something that I could never reach, so I quit trying. So we need to have a lot of wisdom in how much we encourage our kids to reach their potential, but not demand perfection of them. We want to speak the truth in love, growing every way more and more like Christ. So the whole deal is, and this you want to start now with your little ones, as well as your preteens and your just starting to be teens. Engage your child in relationship while pointing them to Christ. It's really all about relationship. Build your relationship with Christ. Build your relationship with your son or your daughter, and talk often about the grace and truth of Jesus. How do you go about building? This isn't supposed to be there. I see I didn't quite get that cued in there, but a strong relationship with your son or daughter. First, you got to have a foundation of your relationship with God, because you need to have your heart secure in Him and who He created you to be. Your heart needs to be in that place where you're not remember the love tank illustration, you're not siphoning that from your kids, but you're ready to pour into them because you have found that the love and acceptance that God has for you, He has that for you as you develop your relationship with Him. And remember, always remember, God chose you to be Maddie and Sam's beautiful mother. And God chose you to be Anna and Grace and Elena's beautiful mother and noble father. He did that on purpose. So he wants you to be the parent for them. And then to always remember, Lord help. That's Psalm 107. When you're in a situation that's above your head, it doesn't matter if it's your own fault because you were foolish or rebellious or because you're lost or you're overwhelmed. He will meet you in that place if you'll ask Him. So build that foundation with the Lord and then build your relationship with your child. Commit time to them. Believe it or not, the drive time you have now is precious time. It'll be gone before you know it. Ask them good questions. Listen to them. Be ready to talk when they are. They're not always ready when you want to sit down and have a talk. You got to be ready when they are. Create memories, family trips, and say I love you and I'm proud of you a lot. And when they're teenagers, this wasn't very original. I'd call them TM moments, like teenage moments. Sometimes it's just hard for them. They're a little, and I'd be like, ooh, teenage moment, we need to have a little break, or kind of make light of it. Use humor and empathy as much as you can. Studies, this is from Mueller, consistently show that the better a teenager's relationship with her parents, and that's what you're building right now, the higher her self-esteem. And research consistently shows that the most protective factor for teens is parent connection and involvement. Resiliency to negative peer pressure and the ability to take a stand is built into our kids as we give them the ability to fall back on us when it's time to make choices. That resilience is built into our kids through building relationship with our kids. So build relationship. Release your teen to grow in self-control. Trust your teens. You've spent a lot of time investing in them, trusting them, and trust God's involvement in their lives. Truth always wins in the end. I'm going to power through this. Foster independence. Offer the freedom to make mistakes in this stage too. And see conflict as an opportunity to build a significant learning opportunity. So remember, the goal of love and discipline is to train your teen to have self-control, not for you to control your teen. So you're releasing them. And also, that in the task of parenting teens, who you are as a person is more important than doing everything right. What is in your heart? And that's why you got to build that foundation with the Lord, because you want that. Whatever is deep inside you is going to leak out into your parenting. But there is good news in the midst of even the really bad parenting moments. Continue to show deep love for each other, for love covers a multitude of sins. The sacrificial love of Jesus is able to cover the multitude of sins that have been done to you, and also to cover the multitude of your own sins that you will sometimes do to your kids. That everyone, you're all going to blow it. And in fact, one of my kids, the one who cut his brother's thumb tip off, he and his wife are watching this series, and he watched the part where I told about that and how horrified as I remember that. He texted me, "Mom, I really do forgive you for that." I said, "I'm so glad love covers a multitude of sins." And he said, "I just said that to somebody the other day. See, I learned that from you." So just know you can really blow it. And if you will ask forgiveness and apologize, love covers a multitude of sins. Ask and allow God to fill up your love tank so that you can pour that love into your kids. Okay, you have one task. right now, while you're a parent, that's all of you, between the birth of your first child till the youngest has become an adult, the main job you have of maturity is sacrificially taking care of children. And if you don't, it will cause distance and confliction in family relationships with your kids. So it's important to learn to sacrifice. What does that look like? Parenting is not about us, it's about our kids. So you pick your battles wisely. Does it really matter if your son shaves his head into a mohawk? No. You have to pick your, do you know what I'm saying? There are going to be things that they'll do and you say, okay, and choose carefully what your battles is. Love, when you don't feel like it, remember their behaviors are just like the fruit on the tree. There's going on in the heart. You want to love them. You want to get to a good future for them. You want to forgive when it's hard. You want to remember, even at this age, if there has to be some kind of correction, they lose privileges for a while or something, there's closure. Don't keep a hurt museum. The next time they're teenagers, they do the same thing again. You want to leave that behind. You want to forgive. Forgiveness is more about you offering forgiveness to your kids than about them asking forgiveness from you. Plain and simple. You're going to have to ask for their forgiveness when you do something wrong to them and not expect that they'll do the same when they wrong you. You're the parent. You're the grown-up. You need to demonstrate to them what it means to forgive. So, you want to hope for the best. Don't get into the cynicism that the teen years have to be awful. We're living testament if you are building into your kids when they're young. Now, again, everyone has free will. There's going to be some kids that will choose no matter what. But we had good relationship, and you're building that now. You're talking a lot with your kids, and that can continue on. It doesn't have to be traumatic during the teenage years. But you do want to prepare them for how hard those years can be, and prepare yourself. It's going to be a challenge. I'm going to have to forgive sometimes. I'm going to have to, say, acknowledge there are hormones and stuff at work and not take it personally. You need to be proactive, training them even at young ages about what is true and good and right, and engage your child in a relationship while continually pointing them to Christ, because it's really His work, transformative. Remember, if we're in Christ, we're a new creature that will ride them through. You can be a beacon of hope, a safe harbor in the turbulence of the teen years. So be that for your kids.